Fellas, a prospect in the UFC is a fighter who has potential to reach the highest end of the UFC, but haven't yet reached it. We've seen some fighters before who have been prospects and have legitimised themselves into massive names in the UFC, and we've seen some prospects before in the UFC that have kind of just gone down a bit of a rabbit hole of losses. So we're going to be going through just some new prospects versus the old prospects in the UFC, some hypothetical fantasy matchups between some of the more modern day prospects and some of the older prospects that we used to see. And we'll start off with the 155 division. The prospects that I've chosen for this division of the nowadays era is going to be Mauricio Hufe, Fares Ziam, and Yoel Alvarez, some of the biggest prospects today. And of the older generation of the lightweights from a couple of years ago, it's going to be Tony Ferguson, Beneil Dariush, and Gregor Gillespie. And we'll start off with the first matchup, which is going to be Mauricio Hufe, and I'm going to put him against Beneil Dariush. Now, he has just called out Beneil Dariush after his win over UFC 313, but obviously Beneil Dariush is in a completely different career spot to what he was back then. How would he fare against Beneil Dariush? Well, they are definitely both two massive prospects. Mauricio Hufe has become a name off essentially just slaughtering these lightweight contenders, not even contenders, but just these lightweight up-and-comers. He did it to Jamie Mullarkey. He then goes out at UFC 309 and absolutely batters James Lontop. Couldn't get him out of there because he was so tough, but beat the crap out of him. And then in his most recent fight, started off the year with a knockout of the year contender with a spinning wheel kick as he puts Bobby Green to sleep. And without a doubt, one of the biggest 155 contenders. And then Beneil Dariush, another massive prospect as well. This guy was on a huge winning streak in the UFC and he could do a bit of everything as well. Could be Beneil Dariush. Who am I picking to win? I'm going to go with Beneil Dariush to win this one by decision. This might be a bit of a hot take, but I feel like we still need to see a little bit more from Mauricio Hufe before we pick him to beat Dariush. And we're talking about prime Dariush before his chin was necessarily cracked. Dariush in his prime could do everything. He could strike, he had dangerous hands, he wasn't like a knockout machine or an elite striker, but he was very well rounded. His grappling was good as well. We saw this in the Gamrot fight from how defensively he was. In the Tony Ferguson fight, his jiu-jitsu and his grappling was high level too. Beneil Dariush can do everything, and Mauricio Hufe's striking has looked amazing. He's 3-0 in the UFC with 2 finishes. We haven't seen him against an elite lightweight yet. Never mind somebody like Beneil Dariush who can do everything. And we're talking about prime Dariush, so maybe this will age badly in a couple of fights. But as of right now, I'm picking Beneil Dariush to beat Mauricio Hufe if we're talking about both of them in their prospect era. Beneil Dariush was 50-50 going into the fight with Oliveira, which just shows how much hype this guy once had. Anyway, for Fares Ziam, I'm going to put him against Tony Ferguson, prime Tony Ferguson versus Fares Ziam. Fares Ziam's done really well. He started off the UFC as a bit of a journeyman. He was winning fights, but he wasn't a prospect. But in his last 2 fights, he's really made a name for himself. Absolutely brutalized Matt Frivola at UFC Paris. Dominated in the entire fight and then got the brutal knockout. And then in his most recent fight, had a scrap with Mike Davis at UFC. I think it was Abu Dhabi. So he's a really good prospect. And obviously Tony Ferguson was on that infamous 12-fight winning streak where he became one of the biggest names in the sport. Who am I picking to win this one? I'm going El Kukui Tony Ferguson to beat Fares Ziam by TKO. I'm picking prime Tony Ferguson to beat Fares Ziam. This is another example of a fighter who nowadays would be a completely different story. But in his prime, in his 12-fight winning streak, I think he'd have done bad things to Fares Ziam. Tony Ferguson, El Kukui, was a monster. This guy was the boogeyman of the lightweight division. There were people out there that thought he was going to be the one to beat Khabib. He roughs people up, he cuts people up, and he can do everything. He's dangerous everywhere the fight goes. And he just found a way to win every single fight in his 12-fight winning streak. Fares Ziam's green in the UFC. He hasn't really faced anybody like Tony Ferguson. He hasn't even faced a single ranked 155er. I ain't picking him to beat prime Tony Ferguson. Fares Ziam got caught up by Mark Davis. I don't like his odds against Tony Ferguson. He even got put in a submission by Mark Davis. I think Tony Ferguson's just got too many ways to win, too many ways to pose a threat to Fares Ziam. So I'm going Tony Ferguson. And the next fighter, Yoel Alvarez, probably the best unranked 155er right now, against Gregor Gillespie. Yoel Alvarez is a prospect because he's finished every single one of his wins. I think he's got 22 wins in the UFC. And apart from a recent loss to Sarukin a few years ago, he's just been slaughtering everybody. And obviously, Gregor Gillespie was a massive prospect. He had KO ability. He had amazing grappling, a great grappling background as well. And then he just decided that he'd had enough of fighting. But he was a massive prospect too. Who am I picking? I'm going Gregor Gillespie to win this one by decision. I think Gregor Gillespie would defeat Yoel Alvarez. And that's just because of how many, we've seen Yoel Alvarez struggle with grappling before. Yes, it was against Arman Sarukian, but that wasn't the only time we've seen Yoel Alvarez struggle with the grappling. And Gregor Gillespie was one of the highest level grappling prospects we saw in the lightweight division. His grappling was elite, and he was one of the biggest what-ifs in the UFC. He also had decent striking as well. I would have picked Gregor Gillespie to win this one by decision because of the wrestling. I think he would have taken Yoel Alvarez down, controlled Yoel Alvarez, probably posed a threat on the feet to Yoel Alvarez too, and essentially just held him down. He's quite a similar matchup in a way. This might be a hot take, but to Arman Sarukian, a guy with good stand-up, even better grappling, nightmare matchup for Yoel Alvarez. I'm going Gregor Gillespie. Then we have the welterweight division. The prospects I've chosen for the nowadays in the welterweight division are Carlos Prates, Brian Battle, and Auburn Elliott. And from the old prospects, I've gone for Darren Till, Ben Askren, and Vicente Luque for the old generation prospects. The first matchup I've got against Carlos Prates is going to be Vicente Luque. Prospect Vicente Luque versus current Carlos Prates. Now, obviously, Carlos Prates is a 5-0 in the UFC, all of them by knockout. One of the most dangerous up-and-coming strikers we've got at welterweight. Just brutally slept Neil Magny in his most recent fight. And he's pretty much a knockout machine in the welterweight division. And he's going to be taking on Vicente Luque, who was also on this massive winning streak. He took a loss to Stephen Thompson, sandwiched by these massive winning streaks, and he could do everything as well. His grappling was elite, his submission was elite, submission game was elite, he had amazing Darce chokes. He could do everything, could Vicente Luque. People thought he was going to be the next big thing in the welterweight division, the silent killer. Who am I picking to win? As much as I want to go with Vicente Luque, I'm going to go with Carlos Prates via TKO. This might be a bit of a hot take, but Carlos Prates is one of the most dangerous welterweights on the roster. He's got KO power like crazy, where he doesn't even have to connect flush to KO people. And I'm not going to sit here and call Vicente Luque chin, but I feel like Prates, we've never really seen him. I know people might say the grappling of Carlos Prates is a problem, but we've never really seen Prates in any major grappling problems in the UFC. His takedown defense is held up. We've seen Vicente Luque get outclassed multiple times in the UFC on the feet. So it isn't even like he's, an elite, one of the elite strikers of Division 2. I think Carlos Prates would break down Vicente Luque. He'd probably piece him up with the Muay Thai, cut up Vicente Luque. I think he does keep the fight on the feet. I know Luque was a mean grappler, but it isn't like Carlos Prates is one of these extremely one-dimensional fighters, because we've never really seen him get dominated or even put in bad positions with grappling. So I think Carlos Prates, being the high-level, fighting nerd striker with the power that he has to back up with it, I'm going Prates to finish Vicente Luque. Then we've got Brian Battle. I'm going to put him against Darren Till. Now, these guys are both massive prospects in the welterweight division. Obviously, Carlos Prates basically made a name for himself for his Octagon interviews. And Darren Till, known for his personality too. Two massive personalities that would sell a fight in the welterweight division. Who am I picking to win? I'm going Darren Till to win this one by decision. Darren Till was an elite striker, man. I know he kind of got clowned upon because he couldn't really pick up a win to save his life, but he was an elite striker. His Muay Thai was very elite back in the day. He was putting people in terrible situations with his striking. And I remember when he dropped Robert Whittaker, almost got a finish with that elbow that he had, that lead elbow coming in. Darren Till was a really good striker, just very one-dimensional, and he couldn't deal with grappling. And I feel like Brian Battle's a very good matchup for Darren Till, because Brian Battle is a very sloppy striker. He likes to kind of get people in the clinch. He's an elite grappler, so I don't think he'll be able to take Darren Till down. I think Darren Till would just put not necessarily a clinic, but a fresh striking performance on Brian Battle and piece him up and get a decision win. I'm going Darren Till. And then we've got Auburn Elliott against Ben Askren. Auburn Elliott, 4-0 in the UFC right now, just got a really good knockout in his most recent fight against Basil Hafez at UFC. I think it was 310. And Ben Askren, obviously, this massive wrestling prospect coming into the UFC, this champion. I think he was undefeated coming into the UFC, and was known for just mauling people with his wrestling. I remember when people said that Ben Askren was going to be the guy to face Usman next, obviously got knocked out by Masvidal. I'm going Ben Askren to win this one via decision. I'm a fan of Auburn Elliott. I like him as a person, and I think he is a good prospect in the welterweight division, but Auburn Elliott, I get he's got good grappling, man. I get he's shown decent grappling against the likes of Preston Parsons, and he's more of a grappler than a striker, but Ben Askren's grappling was on a different level. This dude was taking people down in multiple different organizations. I remember that fight he had against Robbie Lawler, that dog fight where he showed his durability and his toughness and was even able to take down Robbie Lawler for a lot of the time. I can't pick Auburn Elliott to win this one. I get he's got good grappling, but Ben Askren has proved himself a lot more than Auburn Elliott so far. I believe Ben Askren would have just mauled Auburn Elliott to a decision win. I feel like Ben Askren kind of gets underrated by MMA fans. I know he got knocked out by Jake Paul, and he's been on more highlight reels, and obviously not going his way. He's been on more negative highlight reels, but as a fighter himself, his wrestling was elite. He was an amazing wrestler, and I do believe that if Masvidal never landed, and I know it was a big if, he would have dominated Masvidal with the wrestling too. I'm going Ben Askren via decision. Then for the heavyweight division, for the current prospects of heavyweight, I'm going to go with Mario Pinto, Talishan Teixeira, and Shamil Gaziev. And for the older generation prospects, I've gone with Chris Daukaus, Cyril Gane, and Alexander Romanov. Starting off with the first matchup, it's going to be Mario Pinto against Chris Daukaus. Mario Pinto just got a really good knockout against Austin Lane in the last Apex card, where he basically just brutalized Austin Lane. And he's going to be taking on Chris Daukaus, who was once a big prospect. 4 wins on his come up, 4 knockouts all in the first 2 rounds. And people thought Chris Daukaus could have been the next big thing, this fat blob of a heavyweight who was just running through people, seeming to find the button every single time. I'm going to go Mario Pinto to knock out Chris Daukaus, though. I think this is a good example of the heavyweights, at least the unranked heavyweights evolving, and Mario Pinto is one of these more athletic heavyweights. Chris Daukaus, is against Mario Pinto, who's a very... And I'm a fan of Mario Pinto because he's kind of got a bit of a technical striking base. He's not just relying on his power. He has got technical striking, and obviously evident in his most recent fight, he's got KO power. Chris Daukaus was very hittable, and it seemed like eventually people kind of broke past that era of, you know, Chris Daukaus, where all he could really do is swing for the fences and land a KO shot. I feel like a guy like Mario Pinto, being the much more technical striker, would have been able to pick apart Chris Daukaus, get a decision win, but most importantly, land on the button of Chris Daukaus, who was very chinny and would have knocked out Chris Daukaus. I'm going Mario Pinto via KO. Then we've got Talishan Teixeira against Cyril Gane. Now, Talishan Teixeira just got a really good knockout over Justin Tafa at UFC, UFC 312. And Cyril Gane was obviously a massive prospect back in the day. One of the most athletic heavyweight prospects we've ever had. Got basically rushed by the UFC, but still managed to do really well in the fights that he did have with Cyril Gane. I'm going to go with Cyril Gane to win this one via TKO. And it goes without saying, really. Cyril Gane against Talishan Teixeira. Talishan Teixeira is a very sloppy striker. He's kind of one of these heavyweights, like I just described earlier, that doesn't have the best technique and kind of just swings for the fences, hoping that they can land. And you're putting him against Cyril Gane, who's one of the most technical, arguably the best striker in the heavyweight division right now. I know there's an argument between him and Aspinall or maybe Volkov, but there's an argument to make that Cyril Gane is one of the best strikers in this division. I feel like prospect Cyril Gane would have absolutely pieced up Talishan Teixeira, avoided danger as he has before against the likes of Derek Lewis and other heavy hitters like Tatu Ivaza, and he would have pieced up Talishan Teixeira and got a late finish. I'm going Cyril Gane via TKO. And then we've got Shamil Gaziev against Alexander Romanov. Two very similar fighters. Shamil Gaziev just got a really good knockout over Thomas Peterson, and he's a massive name already in the heavyweight division and has obviously mauled a couple of guys. He's got that wrestling base too, where he likes to take people down and just lay on them and keep them there. Against Alexander Romanov, who was quite hyped up at the beginning of his UFC career for just manhandling people, picking people up, slamming them, and just absolutely dominating people with the wrestling. He was one of the best wrestling prospects we had in the heavyweight division, so... who's winning? I'm going to go Shamil Gaziev via TKO. I'm definitely going to go with Shamil Gaziev to win this one. Alexander Romanov had one of the worst gas tanks we've ever seen. I know Shamil Gaziev hasn't got that good of a gas tank either, but he gassed out after 2 rounds of fighting Rosenstrike in the main event. Romanov gasses out after 30 seconds. His stand-up is awful too. I think Shamil Gaziev would keep this fight standing and piece up Romanov on the feet and get probably a second-round KO of Alexander Romanov. I don't think Romanov would be able to dominate Shamil Gaziev with the grappling like he normally does. I reckon Shamil Gaziev would rough up Romanov in the striking department, and I never thought I'd say this, but I feel like Shamil Gaziev would actually want to take this into the later rounds, where he actually has the cardio advantage, which I never expected to say about Shamil Gaziev, but I'm going Gaziev to win this one by TKO, roughs him up in the clinch, and eventually gets to take over Romanov. Then we've got the middleweight division. The middleweight prospects of today's generation are going to be Bo Nickel, Anthony Hernandez, and Reina Derrida. And of the old generation, it's going to be Edmund Shabazian, Jack Hermansson, and Kevin Holland. The first matchup we've got is going to be Bo Nickel against Edmund Shabazian, 2 ginger middleweight prospects. Bo Nickel obviously comes from this big Olympic wrestling background. I think it was the Olympics anyway. Big wrestling prospect, and so far in the UFC has shown up. He's dominated nearly everybody apart from Paul Craig with the wrestling, and he looks to be a really good dominant middleweight prospect, even though he's getting pushed a little bit too much. Against Edmund Shabazian, who was once on a roll in the UFC with 5 straight wins, kind of got rushed to the deep end a little bit too quick, but was an elite striker regardless. Very good kickboxing, very hard-hitting kickboxer too. He was a massive prospect at middleweight too. Who am I picking to win? Pretty comfortable option. I'm going to go with Bo Nickel to win this one via submission. We found out very quickly that Edmund Shabazian didn't have either the grappling or the cardio. He got exposed very quickly for having no grappling against the likes of Derek Brunson and some of the other guys like Anthony Hernandez. And Shabazian, as good of a striker he is very one-dimensional. And one-dimensional is the last thing you want to be when you're taking on Paul Craig, who's one of the best wrestling prospects, one of the best wrestlers we've got right now in the UFC. I get it, he's kind of overhyped and getting pushed a bit too quickly, but when you really break down Bo Nickel, he has got amazing wrestling. He's one of the best in the UFC. It's no surprise he came from such a big wrestling background. Bo Nickel would take down Edmund Shabazian, wear him out, and I think he would find a submission against Shabazian in the first 2 rounds. He'd either maul him in the first and then get a submission, or Shabazian would be gassed and then he'd find a submission. Either way, Bo Nickel's out-grappling Shabazian and submitting him pretty comfortably. Shabazian's very one-dimensional. Then we've got Anthony Hernandez against Jack Hermansson. This is kind of like a dream matchup for me, a very fantasy fight in the middleweight division. You've always got Anthony Hernandez, who's kind of just been mauling people, mauling straight contenders, mauled Michelle Pereira, mauled Brendan Allen in his most recent fight, and Allen's obviously a really good grappler himself. Hernandez is kind of like a modern-day Cain Velasquez. Elite grappler, always busy with the grappling too, looking to either beat the shit out of you with ground and pound or look for a submission. And you've got Jack Hermansson, who was a submission god back in the day. People are hyping this up to be the next big submission machine. We might have Khamzat Chimaev nowadays. Before Chimaev existed, Jack Hermansson was that guy in the middleweight division, that grappler in the middleweight division who was supposed to out-grapple everybody. Who am I picking to win? I'm a huge fan of Fluffy, but I'm going to go with Jack Hermansson, the prospect, to win this one. I think Jack Hermansson's a nightmare matchup for Anthony Hernandez, and I think it's the stand-up. Anthony Hernandez has not got great striking. He is quite undersized for the division, and his boxing isn't that crisp or just his striking overall. Jack Hermansson, we've seen outstrike some pretty decent strikers. He did it to Joe Pyfer in his most recent fight, and then the grappling as well of Jack Hermansson. I actually think he's a better submission artist than Hernandez. Maybe Hernandez has a better, job of wearing people out and being more busy with the grappling, but from a submission perspective, Jack Hermansson's an elite grappler. I think he avoids danger with the grappling against Hernandez, keeps the fight standing, and probably picks him apart on the feet. I think Hermansson's striking is really good, like I said, against Joe Pyfer, even against Chris Curtis a few years ago. I'm picking Jack Hermansson not to dominate Anthony Hernandez. Hernandez is obviously going to put him in danger, but I feel like Hermansson's just going to keep this fight standing, pick him apart, and get a decision win. Then for Reina de Ridder, it's against prospect Kevin Holland. Now, we've obviously just seen this fight in both of their most recent fights where Reina de Ridder submitted Kevin Holland pretty easily in the first round, but we're talking about a different Kevin Holland. We're talking about prospect Kevin Holland back in the 2020 era, and I'm actually going to go with prospect Kevin Holland to win this one, who was on that winning streak. I'm going Kevin Holland by KO. Kevin Holland back in 2020, I feel like that's when he actually had a passion for the sport. Not the current Kevin Holland that's kind of showing up for a paycheck, can't be bothered. Kevin Holland with passion was a dangerous dude. This guy knocked out Anthony Hernandez, who, by the way, was another really dangerous grappler, and Joaquin Buckley back-to-back. Kevin Holland was a mean guy back in the day. 5 wins in 2020. Great takedown defense back in the day. Well, maybe not great takedown defense, but decent takedown defense and the knockout ability on the feet. Reina de Ridder has to be one of the goofiest strikers in the UFC. You're getting outstruck at times by Gerald one-dimensional Mearshart. Yeah, I'm picking Kevin Holland to knock him out. You can't be goofy on the feet against Kevin Holland in 2020, at least, a prospect version of Kevin Holland, and seem to succeed. I think Holland would have kept his distance, kept the fight standing as best as he could, would have at least put up a fight against Reina de Ridder, and when he got back to the feet, I think he would have sparked out Reina de Ridder. Prospect Kevin Holland and today's Kevin Holland, two completely different fighters. I'm going Holland by KO. Then we've got the Bantamweight division. The Bantamweight prospects of today are going to be Vinicius Oliveira, Alexandre Topuria, and Raul Rosas Jr. And back in the day, I've gone with Thomas Almeida, Jack Shaw, and Adrian Yanez. The first matchup we've got is going to be Vinicius Oliveira against Adrian Yanez. This is actually quite a good fight even nowadays. But if we're talking about this in terms of a fancy matchup, you've got Vinicius Oliveira, who got a KO of the year contender last year with that flying knee over Sapai, and he's kind of just shown up in every fight that he's had. You got a real good upset win over Said Nurmagomedov in his most recent fight, and he's probably the best unranked bantamweight right now, against Adrian Yanez, who was this massive prospect a few years ago, knocking people out left, right, and center, just pure sparking people out on the feet. People saying he's going to be a top 5 bantamweight in a couple of years. There was so high hopes for Adrian Yanez, didn't even ever really manage to live through, and I'm going to go with Vinicius Oliveira to win this one by decision. I'm a fan of Yanez. He's one of my favorites in the bantamweight division because he's just all offense, no defense. But Vinicius Oliveira is the last guy you want to be doing that against because, like I said, Yanez, as good as he was offensively with the boxing, he was very, very hittable on the feet. Very hittable on the feet. And now you put him in against Vinicius Oliveira, who's a very technical striker, has a good gas tank, tough as well. He just beat Said Nurmagomedov with a broken rib. And Said Nurmagomedov's no easy fight to win. I think Vinicius Oliveira would have mixed it up with a crafty striking, avoided dangers from Adrian Yanez, and just picked them apart. We saw Daniel Marcos pick apart Adrian Yanez. We saw Rob Font knock him out. We saw Jonathan Martinez pick him apart and finish him too. I don't see why, if those guys can do it, Vinicius Oliveira, who's one of the best unranked bantamweights and one of the biggest prospects ever as of today with elite striking, wouldn't be able to do it either. Oliveira via decision. And then we've got Alexandre Topuria versus Jack Shaw. Obviously, Alexandre Topuria, the brother of Ilie Topuria, that's kind of why he's hyped up, but he looked good in his UFC debut as well, taking on Jack Shaw, who people were going to call the Welsh GSP. He was on a 5-0 run in the UFC with 2 finishes, very well-rounded, found a way to win every fight. but I'm going to go with Alexandre Topuria to win this one by decision. I don't think he dominates Jack Shaw. I think this is actually quite a tough fight. If you're going to a decision with, what's his name, Cody, I forgot his name, Cody Thickness, you ain't beating Jack Shaw with dominant fashion either. But Alexandre Topuria, in my opinion, was it would be a very bad matchup for Jack Shaw. This very calm, calculated striker, similar to his brother, that has KO ability, also has really good takedown defense and grappling. And Jack Shaw, as we saw as he progressed in his UFC career, I feel like he was never able to hit that elite barrier. He's striking, well, he's been hit on the feet. I mean, I'm not going to say he's a terrible striker, but his striking kind of got exposed a little bit by Anderson Brito, where he got slashed to the leg. Yusuf Salah was able to drop him. He definitely slowed down towards the end of his career. What was his name? Ricky Simon was able to take him down and submit him. I feel like for Jack Shaw, as talented as he is, he was never able to break into the top 15. And I know we're kind of just hyping up Topuria because of his brother's name and not his own accomplishments, but I feel like Topuria, I'm picking him to beat Jack Shaw. Not much reason why. It is a lot of potential because of the potential that he has and being Topuria's brother, but I'm picking Alexandre Topuria to back up Jack Shaw against the cage, probably rough him up in the striking, avoid any grappling threat with his elite takedown defense, and pick up a decision with a Jack Shaw, but it's a tough one to call. And then we've got Raul Rosas Jr. against Thomas Almeida. Raul Rosas Jr. obviously hyped up for being the youngest fighter in the UFC, and he's actually on quite a bit of a good run in the UFC. Obviously lost to Christian Rodriguez, but apart from that, he's got 5 wins in the UFC, a couple of good wins on there as well. Going to be taking on Thomas Almeida, who was a massive prospect back in the day. I know he got that bad knockout loss to Cody Garbrandt, but apart from that, he was straight just slaughtering people with his boxing on the feet. And just the fact that he's very well-rounded too, was Thomas Almeida. Underrated grappler in my opinion, kind of fell off towards the end of his UFC career. Who am I picking to win? I'm going to go with Thomas Almeida via KO. Raul Rosas Jr. isn't bad, but he's definitely not elite level. And we've seen this when he's facing these lower level fighters like Archie Long, who are having success against Raul Rosas Jr. in the striking department. I can't pick you to beat Thomas Almeida, who is shown against much better strikers like Brad Pickett and like some of the other guys that he faced, how dangerous his striking really was. Thomas Almeida was a very hard-hitting, very offensively heavy striker, very kind of crafty on the feet too. I'm picking Thomas Almeida to land on Raul Rosas Jr. Raul Rosas Jr. is a very basic striker. Thomas Almeida, I think, would crack the chin of a Raul Rosas Jr., who's very green in his UFC career, or just his MMA career in general. The guy's, what, 19 years old? And I know Raul Rosas Jr. has the grappling, has the jiu-jitsu, but it isn't like he's an elite grappling prospect. Yes, his jiu-jitsu is his advantage, but I just don't see him taking the fight to the mat against Thomas Almeida. I don't think he's able to. Thomas Almeida clips Raul Rosas Jr., gets a knockout win. And then we've got, in the light heavyweight division, the prospects that I've chosen for the modern generation are going to be Ming Yang Zhang, Umar Sy, and Modestas Bukauskas. And from the older generation, I've gone with Ryan Spann, Thiago Santos, and Alexander Rakic. The first fight we've got is going to be Ming Yang Zhang against Ryan Spann. Ming Yang Zhang, every single one of his wins are by first round finish, whether it be by KO or submission, and he's on this huge winning streak by just first round finishes. A massive prospect in the light heavyweight division, and he just got that really good knockout over Ozzy Diaz. This guy is one of the hardest hitting heavyweights right now, light heavyweights right now. He's going to be taking on Ryan Spann, who had a very similar kind of run up to his UFC career, where he's kind of just finishing people early. He took a couple of losses here and there. A very dangerous guy though, and he also had very good knockout ability. I remember that knockout out of a Dominic Reyes, which was very brutal. Who am I picking to win this fight? I'm going to go with Ming Yang Zhang to win this one by KO. If you're going to pick either of them to win, it's going to be via KO because of how hard hitting they both are. But Ming Yang Zhang, I'm a massive fan. Ryan Spann, he's just not that elite. His fight IQ is awful. We've seen him get finished on the feet by Johnny Walker before. And it seems like Ryan Spann's one of those fighters where it's either you get me first or I get you first. And if you click Ryan Spann before he gets you, he's probably not going to be able to recover and he's probably going to get knocked out. Or he's just going to be off for the rest of the fight is kind of what I'm trying to say. Like, Ryan Spann has to connect first. You put him in against Ming Yang Zhang, who's a very kind of patient striker, but when he lands, and when he lands flush, he puts everybody out. I'm picking Ming Yang Zhang to knock out Ryan Spann. Dangerous guy on a huge winning streak. Looks a lot more like he has a lot more potential than Ryan Spann. I ain't picking a guy who's getting finished by Anthony Smith. Fair enough, it was a much better Anthony Smith compared to the one now, and Johnny Walker to beat Ming Yang Zhang. As dangerous as Ryan Spann was, terrible fight IQ. If you hit him with a big shot first, he doesn't really recover and he's kind of just on the back foot and he's very beatable. I'm going Ming Yang Zhang to beat Ryan Spann. Then we've got Umar Sy against Thiago Santos. Umar Sy is on this huge winning streak, undefeated in MMA, 2 wins in the UFC with a submission, and he seems to be quite a promising prospect in the light heavyweight division against Thiago Santos, who was also on a really good winning streak too. I know he lost to David Branch, but he was looking really good leading up to that John Jones fight, and he was very dangerous too. The vast majority of his wins by KO, finished Jan Blachowicz, finished some elite light heavyweights in his run too. I'm going to go with Thiago Santos via decision. I was contemplating whether I go Thiago Santos via KO or decision, but I feel like the modern light heavyweights have definitely caught up to the guys like Thiago Santos back in the day. But I'm going to go with Thiago Santos. Umar Sy is just too green in his MMA career, and you put him in against a dangerous striker who had very good kickboxing in Thiago Santos. Santos is a much better kickboxer than Umar Sy, and like I said, Umar Sy, as good as he is and as technical as he does look, and he does look promising, he's too green in his UFC career. You put him against Thiago Santos when he was a prospect, big step up for Umar Sy. He gets pieced up by Thiago Santos badly. Could even get a late finish for Thiago Santos in the third round. I'm going to go Thiago Santos to piece up a finish Umar Sy. And then we've got Modestas Bukauskas against Alexander Rakic. Obviously, Rakic is a top contender nowadays, but he was another big prospect in the light heavyweight division too. Now, Modestas Bukauskas, he did get knocked out by Vitor Petrino, but he is 4-1 in his new run to the UFC, and his last 2 wins have both been by finish, and he just got a really good knockout over Rafael Sequeira at UFC Seattle. He's training with Tom Aspinall, and he seems to be a promising guy coming up. Against Alexander Rakic, who was on this big winning streak, and he lost a split decision, which was quite controversial to Volkan Oezdemir, and apart from that, he had some really good wins that he strung together. Who am I picking to win? I'm going to go with Alexander Rakic to win this one by decision. Yeah, Modestas Bukauskas is good, but I just don't know if he's elite level. I don't even know if we're going to see Modestas Bukauskas become ranked in the top 15, because as good as he is, he makes every fight close. He was getting hit a lot by Marcin Prachnio. It isn't like he's an elite or he's beat any elite light heavyweights as of now. And Rakic is a top 5. Maybe he doesn't deserve the ranking spot, but he's definitely a top 5 in terms of, you know, kickboxing ability in the light heavyweight division. And I think he's a way better kickboxer than Modestas Bukauskas. I see this being a very striking heavy fight between the two of them, where Rakic, as he's displayed against some other guys, even like Yuri in the first round, would completely pick apart Modestas Bukauskas and get a unanimous decision win. I'm a fan of Modestas Bukauskas. I hope he does well, but Alexander Rakic, as a prospect, completely pieces him up, attacks him to the leg, uses his kicks at range, and just completely pieces up Modestas Bukauskas. Rakic via decision. Then, the next division is going to be the flyweight division. The fighters I've chosen for flyweight are going to be Joshua Van, Ramazan Temirov, and Rafael Estevam. And of the old generation, it's going to be Sergio Pettis, Askar Askarov, and Joseph Benavidez. The first fight we've got is going to be Joshua Van against Sergio Pettis. Joshua Van is one of the best boxers in the flyweight division, full stop. This guy is absolutely piecing people up with his boxing. 6-1 in the UFC, with his only loss being to Charles Johnson. Should be ranked as well. And he's kind of just murking people with his boxing against Sergio Pettis, who was kind of hyped up for being the brother of Anthony Pettis, but he did prove himself in the UFC. He won in a decent run in himself in the UFC, stringing together a couple of wins. Who am I picking to win? Joshua Van. By decision. Joshua Van's beating Sergio Pettis. Van, he's, like I said before, really crisp boxing. I'm going to go out and say he's probably one of the best strikers, at least one of the best boxers we've ever seen in the bantamweight division. He actually mixes it up really well. We're starting to see him piece these guys up, and Sergio Pettis was talented too. But I think it's just a different generation, man. Joshua Van, I think, would keep this fight standing. I mean, they both keep the fight standing, where Joshua Van would just unload on Sergio Pettis with the boxing, ripping it to the body with the combinations. And I see Joshua Van winning this one. I think he's a future top 5 fighter in the flyweight division, very young too. And as good as Sergio Pettis was, he was never a top contender. I'm picking Joshua Van to win this one via decision because of how good his boxing is, and just the fact that the sport has changed, everybody's evolved, Joshua Van being one of them, especially in these lower weight classes. Anyway, Ramazan Temirov against Askar Askarov. Ramazan Temirov debuts in the UFC, getting a brutal knockout against CJ Vajera, and in his most recent fight, beating Charles Johnson in quite a close and controversial win that I thought he won, in a good win. And he's going to be taking on Askar Askarov, who didn't go on this huge win in the run in the UFC, but you look at some of the names he beat. He beat Pantoja, he beat Joseph Benavidez, he went to a draw with Brandon Moreno, and he beat Tim Elliott by decision. Those are some elite wins, or elite fights in the bantamweight division, and flyweight division. I'm going to go with Askarov to win this one by decision. He was beating some elite flyweights like I just showed you. It's too early for me to pick Ramazan Temirov, and I liked how Askar Askarov could always mix it up. He mixed it up a lot with the grappling when he needed to. He had that grappling in his back pocket that was effective, but he could also stand. I know we're talking about an old, completely washed Benavidez, but you look at him in that Benavidez fight, and he looked very flush in the stand-up department against Joseph Benavidez. He's very well rounded. He's a bad matchup for Temirov. I think he'd take it into the later rounds and piece up Temirov too, because Temirov's gas tank is awful. And if you're beating Pantoja, going to a draw with Brandon Moreno, and beating some of the other elite flyweights at the time, I can't pick Ramazan Temirov, who's 2-0 in the UFC with one controversial fight, to beat Askarov. I'm going to go with Askarov to win this one by decision, and I think he wins it by a pretty comfortable unanimous decision too. And then we've got Rafael Estevam against Joseph Benavidez. Rafael Estevam undefeated 13-0. Goes under the radar in the flyweight division because he's very inactive. But he's on this huge winning streak against Joseph Benavidez, who was always so close to winning the belt and then always lost, but went on this huge winning streak in between these losses in the flyweight division. I'm going to go with Joseph Benavidez to TKO Rafael Estevam. Benavidez was one of the elite flyweights. I know he massively fell off towards the end of his career, but he was elite, and I think he was a little monster back in the day in the flyweight division. I think the striking of Joseph Benavidez, the leg kicks early on, would definitely pay dividends to Rafael Estevam. Estevam didn't look overly good against Jesus Aguilar in his most recent fight. Like I said, Benavidez, very well-rounded, good striking, good boxer, faced the elites. Too early for Rafael Estevam. We don't even know if he's ranked worthy. And like I said, he didn't look elite against Jesus Aguilar as well. He definitely won that fight, but he definitely gassed out. If you're gassing out against Aguilar, I think Joseph Benavidez, being the quick and a striker who's very good at mixing it up, would have definitely found a TKO over Rafael Estevam in those later rounds. Third round TKO to Joseph Benavidez. And then for the featherweight division, the featherweights of the modern generation that I've chosen are going to be Gene Silva, Doo Ho Choi, and Steve Garcia. And of the old generation, I've gone with Zabit Magomed Sharipov, Shane Burgos, and Sadiq Youssef. Now, the first matchup is going to be Gene Silva against Sadiq Youssef, a fight that I actually think would have made sense a couple of fights ago. I mean, if after Gene Silva beat Charles Jourdain, I thought this was the fight to make, or after he beat Drew Dober, I thought this could have been the fight to make in the featherweight division. But either way, you've got Gene Silva, who is just slaughtering people in the featherweight division. One of the best featherweights in the world right now, and I don't even care if he's not even ranked. He's already proven that he is for the work that he's doing and from the gym that he's from. Yes, I'm hyping up the gym because we know how good Fighting Nerds is. And he's just managed to become a star, even without even having a ranking next to him name, because of the work that he's doing, because of how elite he is in the stand-up and how dangerous he is. He's a massive star in the featherweight division against Sadiq Youssef, who had a good run back in the day. I say back in the day, it was like 2-3 years ago now. Took a loss to Arnold Allen, but was still a good prospect on the come-up in the featherweight division. Very dangerous and hard-hitting too. But I'm going to go with Gene Silva to win this one by KO. We found out very quick that Sadiq Youssef wasn't able to break that top 5, even that top 10 of the featherweight division. You put him against an elite striker and he gets found out, he gets picked apart. Or as in the case of Diego Lopez, he gets put to sleep. And you put him in against Gene Silva, who I really do believe is going to be a top 10, maybe even a top 5 featherweight in the future. And he's just a much better striker than Sadiq Youssef from everywhere the fight goes. From his defense to his craftiness on the feet to his offense and even to the danger perspective, he would find the chin of Sadiq Youssef and crack it. Yeah, Gene Silva's finding the chin of Sadiq Youssef. He's clipping him, he's knocking him out probably early on. I think he stays patient, lets Sadiq Youssef do whatever he wants to do, and then when Sadiq Youssef lunges in, bang, Gene Silva knocks him out. I'm going Gene Silva by KO. Then we've got Doo Ho Choi against Shane Burgos. Doo Ho Choi is in a complete knockout machine. He's a babyface. You wouldn't expect it when you look at him, but this guy's knocking people out left, right, and center. And he had 2 kind of runs in the UFC. He went on a bit of a losing streak at one point, but then he came back from that losing streak, a much better version. And in his most recent fight, absolutely dominated Nate Landwehr on the feet, in the grappling at UFC 310. And I think he's one of the best and most dangerous unranked featherweights against Shane Burgos, who had his run back in the day, got knocked out by Calvin Cato, but either way, was still on a really impressive run in the UFC. I'm going to go with Doo Ho Choi, though, to win this one by KO. Shane Burgos, I'm not going to call him shitty because he got knocked out by Edson Barboza, but he was by no means an elite featherweight, in my opinion. He was quite hittable on the feet, quite a basic striker too. He had really good fight IQ, and his ability to mix things up was talented too, but I think on the feet he was a little bit too basic in my opinion. And we've just seen Doo Ho Choi absolutely dominate their Landwehr, and even though he's very inactive and he doesn't fight that often, he's Doo Ho Choi, this guy must hit like a truck, because even when he connects, even when he was connected against Nate Landwehr, it sounded like a baseball bat. He must hit like a truck. Very dangerous striker. I think he would land on Shane Burgos at some point in the fight and KO him. So I'm going to go with Doo Ho Choi by KO at some point in the fight against Shane Burgos. And then we've got Steve Garcia against Zabit Magomed Sharipov. Steve Garcia is on a 5-fight winning streak, all by finish. Kind of goes under the radar in the featherweight division. And he's just knocking people out, breaking people apart, ribs to the body, finding the shot up top. And he's got some really good wins in that winning streak too. He beat Chase Hooper after he broke his losing streak against Zabit Magomed Sharipov, who's one of the craftiest fighters we've ever seen in the featherweight division. Another one of these biggest what-ifs where he retired when he was in his prime. But Zabit Magomed Sharipov was something special for the time that we did see him in the octagon. Who am I picking to win? I've got to go with Zabit Magomed Sharipov to win this one by decision. He was one of the most elite craft, well, maybe not elite in terms of championship level, but one of the craftiest, but it worked as well. There's a lot of fighters in the UFC who are crafty, like Sharpleton Magomedov, who never were able to make it work. Zabit was one of them who made it work, and he did it against elite fighters, like Jeremy Stevens, like Calvin Kattar. The only real problem with Zabit Magomedsharipov was the gas tank, but his striking was a lot better than everybody who was facing. Even his grappling, he had like such elite, like crafty grappling as well. It wasn't just a generic double leg takedown. He'd do like scissor sweeps to take people down. He was so crafty and so unorthodox. I've got to pick him to beat Steve Garcia, who does seem to be dangerous, but we've not even seen Garcia beating, well, I know he's had some good wins, but he hasn't beaten a single top 15, top 10 fighter right now in the featherweight division. I feel like Zabit would have overwhelmed Steve Garcia. Maybe Garcia could have taken it into the later rounds and roughed him up with the boxing because of how dangerous Garcia is, but I'm going to go with Zabit Magomedsharipov to win this one via decision. But those are the fights between new and old prospects in the UFC and how they would have gone. Let me know your thoughts if you agree, disagree. Thank you for watching.